All right, I'm ready whenever you are.
Okay,
Hmm.
all set.
Decisions, decisions, decisions. That's what happens when you go through a divorce. You need to make all kinds of decisions. And right at the beginning, let's be honest, you're not prepared to do that. I know I wasn't. I didn't even know what decisions had to be made, when they had to be made. I didn't even know what to even ask. And that's what I want to dedicate this podcast to, the decisions in divorce that need to be made and how to make good ones. And my guest is divorce attorney Catherine Becker Good. Catherine is the founder of her practice, the law offices of Catherine Becker Good in Massachusetts, Boston area. And Catherine's been a divorce attorney for 30 years. So she's very familiar with decision making. She's seen it all as far as clients, what decisions they have to make, how they feel. So she's a great, great person to talk about this with. Hi, Catherine.
Hello.
Thank you so much for being on the show. I always enjoy talking to you and hearing your wisdom.
Oh, thank you. I always enjoy participating in these.
Good. Okay. So, do you agree with me that at the beginning of the divorce, when people come to you for a consultation, they don't even know what to ask? They're scared. They might be insecure, nervous. They don't have confidence. They're heartbroken. Is that what's going on? And what do they say about making these decisions? Do they even not even know what decisions have to be made?
So oftentimes when people are coming in, they're going through a major life change. And so they're usually very emotional, they're very indecisive, they're looking for guidance, they're looking for someone to give them some sort of plan or, roadmap forward. So it's not unusual for people to come in and just be completely overwhelmed and not know which way to turn, what decisions need to be made, what's the best decision for them, etc.
And I don't want this to be so negative. So let's just skip to the end before we get into it and say that when you see these people after they're divorced, let's say a year, year and a half later, or even 6 months, aren't they different people?
Completely different people. And I just had that conversation with a client of mine the other day who was about 1 year out, and we were talking about looking back a year. It was amazing how much she had changed, how much she had sort of figured out, how much stronger she was, how much more decisive she was. And really, a year is a long time, but it's not a long time. But within that year, usually people can really make remarkable changes, just to their mindset, to their life, and moving forward.
And I would say you're right. Even if they're not fully divorced yet, if they're not even, their divorce isn't even over, a year into it, you are so much smarter. Now you have your head in the game. You know what you're doing. You've kind of been like, I hate to use these words, but like kind of beaten down a little. You've experienced the lows. You've been scared as hell and you realize that you can do it. So you have more self-confidence. So even before the divorce is final, you become this much stronger person.
I agree.
So I want to get into the decisions that people have to make specifically. And then I want to ask for your advice and tips on what to do to make the best decision. So there's specific decisions. And before I list the decisions, I want to ask you this, Catherine. Don't you feel like your clients, especially at the beginning, will call you all the time for everything? And they don't realize that you're the legal piece. You're extremely important, the most important part, because you can't get divorced without a divorce attorney, but that you source a lot of this stuff out to experts in in their fields.
Correct. Yep.
And and this way, the client benefits not only because they get an expert in that area, but they also are saving money on divorce attorneys' fees.
That's true.
Okay, so let's start with the first decision someone might have to make. Should I get divorced or should I try to work this out? Is that one you hear a lot?
I do. And oftentimes people will come in and they will say, I'm thinking about getting divorced. You know, it's either the very beginning of the process, maybe it's the first time they've thought about it. Other times they'll come in and say, you know, I've been thinking about this for a couple months, a couple years, but I think I'm finally ready, but they're not really ready. And then sometimes clients will come in and say, I'm done. I want to start this right away. So you get people sort of all along the way. And I always say to people, you will know when you're ready. You'll just know. And then invariably they will come back when they're ready and say, you were right. I'm not, I'm now ready. I'm ready to go.
And is that sometimes 6 months or a year? It's can be a
Can
long
be
time.
years, yes. And the reason is if you think about it, it's almost like it's the death of a marriage. So people are really mourning the loss of their marriage, and I think they try to do everything they can to revive it or save it. Particularly if the other person is saying they want to save it. They want to say or feel as if they've at least tried. But usually if it's something that's been sort of a long time coming, it's not always successful. And so or people will revert to their old patterns or habits or whatever it is that caused the rift in the beginning. And so unfortunately, sometimes people just find themselves, consulting with a divorce attorney and proceeding with the divorce. But it is oftentimes a long emotional process.
Now, I find that people will pursue a divorce and then they start reading all these articles on
Mhm.
Divorce Girl Smiling, and they'll be like, okay, this is going to be such a nightmare. I'm too afraid to do this. I'm going to try to work it out. And
Mhm.
I think that's perfectly okay to do that. If
Mhm.
you don't like what you're reading and you're like, I don't want my life to look like this, I don't think I can do it, go try again. And
Mhm.
I would say almost always they realize they're willing to take the risk and get divorced because then they read the articles about how much better people's lives are when they get out of a toxic marriage.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you.
All right. So if you're listening to this and you're saying, I don't know if I should get divorced because it's so complicated and the kids, and I might still be in love. And even if I'm not in love, maybe I could find my way back to being in love. There's something called discernment counseling that is really getting popular. It's been around for a long time, but it's now popular. So Catherine, what is discernment counseling?
So discernment counseling involves a couple where, for lack of a better explanation, one person has one foot in the marriage and the other person is one foot out. And they're trying to decide through counseling, sort of how to proceed. And sometimes if you go to couples counseling, the assumption is you're going to try and work toward reunification, but in the differences in discernment counseling, it's sort of okay to not know whether you want to move forward or whether you want to, or whether you want to move forward with the divorce or whether you want to stay in the marriage. And it's all about sort of both parties making that decision together. And that's what the counseling involves.
Okay, now I want to tell my listeners that discernment counseling is completely different than couples counseling. We're not trying to work on issues to save your marriage. We're
Mhm.
trying, not we, I don't do this. I don't know why I'm saying we, but the discernment counselor will work with you and help you come to the conclusion. She'll ask questions and listen and help you come to the conclusion in 2 to 4 sessions. So it's not this long process. That's why I think it's so effective. It will help you make the decision, is this really salvageable? Is this what we both really want? So if you're looking for a discernment counselor, I have to give a plug to Ginny Wright, Dr. Ginny Wright, Wright. And Ginny is a discernment counselor. She's a Divorce Girl Smiling trusted professional. She's a therapist with a PhD. You can look her up on Divorced Girl Smiling. Okay. Next question that people ask, and a decision that they have to make that is one of the biggies is, what do I want to do about my living situation? Should I stay in my home? Can I afford to stay in my home? Should I rent? Should I buy a new, smaller home? Should I give my home to my husband? Tell me about that. Do you hear that a lot?
I do. And but even before that, even before the determining what to do with the house, people will say, is it okay to leave? Because they're concerned that if they leave the home, that it will be considered abandonment and somehow they're either giving up rights to their kids or giving up rights to the house as an asset. And I always just advise them, do what's right for you. You know, you need to do what's best for you. And it's not going to be considered abandonment. It's not going, and your rights will be preserved. In terms of what to do moving forward with the
Wait,
house,
can I just interrupt
Right.
you and ask you, is that in the state of Massachusetts, or do you think every state it's okay to leave and they won't be?
so I can only speak to Massachusetts. I
Okay,
don't
okay, I
know.
just
Yes,
want
I
to
should have
clarify that.
clarified that. Yes,
Yes.
that's an
Okay.
important point.
So that is a very good question for a divorce attorney in your state. And Catherine, of course, if
Mhm.
you decide to call and consult with her in
Right.
Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So in regards to what to do about the house.
Yes. And then with respect to the house, usually there are two choices. One person buys the other out, or the house is sold and you figure out how the net proceeds are going to be divided. Um, if if my client is considering buying out the other person, the next step would be to consult with a mortgage broker or, someone a lender, and see if they qualify and how much they qualify for. Because what they not only have to take over the outstanding mortgage, but they then have to pay their soon-to-be ex-spouse their share of the equity. And it gets a little more complicated because maybe you can take the share of the equity from another asset, but just assuming um, they're going to use the equity in the house, you want to make sure that they can qualify. And so sometimes that's the first step. They'll either find out they can, or if they can't, then that's not an option, and they move to the next decision. Another person to consult with would be a financial advisor, because they can also look at all of the assets and see what makes sense in terms of buying out the other person's interest in the equity. So those are two different professionals that I would recommend someone to before they make the decision on what to do with the house.
Great, great advice. And what I have to say to the listeners is, when I was getting divorced, calling a mortgage lender did not even enter my mind. In fact, I called one when I was awarded the house, and then I called my lawyer and I was like, oh my gosh, how do you get a mortgage? How do I do this? It was all after the fact. So here's the good news about calling a mortgage lender. They are going to give you so much information because you have to give them all of your financials, and then you're going to know if you can afford it. You're going to find out all this other stuff, and a certified divorce lending professional, a CDLP, specializes and has a certification to help people who are getting divorced. And guess what? It doesn't even cost any more than it does to use another mortgage lender. So if you can find a CDLP, that's the best. And you can find a CDLP and financial advisors. I'm not going to say this throughout the whole podcast, but you can go to Divorce Girl Smiling, look up trusted professionals, and you can find 50 trusted, vetted divorce professionals in all of these categories, including Catherine. You're listening to the Divorced Girl Smiling podcast. My name is Jackie Pilosoff, and I'm your host. I'm here today with divorce attorney in Massachusetts, Catherine Becker Good. And Catherine and I are talking about decisions that need to be made in divorce and how to make good ones. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we have 3 other decisions to tell you about that you're going to need to make in your divorce. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Divorced Girl Smiling podcast. My name is Jackie Pilosoff, and I'm your host. There are so many decisions to be made in divorce that people don't even know about. And you want to make sure to make good decisions so you end up with a good outcome and a happy, healthy post-divorce life. That's what we're talking about today. My guest is Catherine Becker Good, a 30-plus year divorce attorney veteran in Massachusetts. And Catherine, let's move on to the next decision people need to make. And by the way, these aren't in any order. You don't have to make these decisions in order, although should I get divorced should be the first decision. But after that, this isn't specific to order. Okay, parenting schedules. What kind of time do I want with my kids? What time with my kids can I even make it work? Maybe I have a job where I travel 5 days out of the week. Tell me about that.
So that's actually a very good point because sometimes people will come in and say, for example, that they want a 50-50 shared custody plan. But when you actually look at their work schedule or their work travel schedule, it's just not realistic. They physically can't do it. For example, they leave the house at 7 a.m., so they can't drive their children to school in the morning, or they work until 6 p.m., so they can't pick them up after school. So that's you have to look at, and then, how far apart do the parents live from each other? Is it practical? How far does one parent live from the children's school? And so there's all sorts of different considerations. But the one thing to keep in mind with a parenting plan is that nothing is irreversible. You should, you can always try something, and if it doesn't work, you can go back and you can tweak it and you can try something else. So, if I just usually say to people, try what you think is best for your family. And again, they can tailor it to their individual needs, the children's schedules, the parents' schedules. And again, if it doesn't work, you can tweak it. And I think a lot of people feel as if they have to ask for 50-50 custody when it just might not work for that family. So I think there needs to be just, some freedom to say it's okay not to have 50%, because it just doesn't work for us. So that would be my piece of advice.
And I love that you brought that up because I think there's a lot of people listening, either who they or their spouse feels like if I don't ask for 50-50, people are going to think I don't love my kids. People are
Mhm.
going to think I'm a bad parent. That is 100% not true. You are doing the best you can. If you have to work and your wife or your husband has the kids more because of that, you're doing your kids a favor. You don't want your kids raised by babysitters all the time. If you feel your kids are safe with your ex, he or she is loving, and you feel like they're in good hands, then don't worry about what other people think. Nobody is going to think less of you for doing what is best for your kids. Next decision is work. Should I go back to work? Do I have to go back to work? Do I have to change jobs now? What do you think about that?
That's a tricky question because sometimes finances dictate somebody going back to work. And it's not always easy, particularly if you have someone who's been out of the workforce for a while. How do they jump back in? How do they even begin to look for a job? Again, I usually tell people do what's best for you. Look at the whole situation. How old are the kids? Do you need to, is it cost prohibitive to hire somebody to help you out with the children while you work? How much can you realistically make it work? And so that's really not an easy question to answer. And I think it's one of those questions that you just have to look at the whole picture and decide what's best and if it makes financial sense. Usually it does, it usually makes sense to try and bring in some money. But again, you're going to now be living a whole different reality, and you're going to have a parenting plan that maybe, you need to be more available than you needed to be before. Or maybe you have more freedom because the other parent is taking the child some of the time. So it's really just an individual decision. Um, it's a hard one. I'll admit that's a hard one to decide, but I think you just have to look at the whole picture and not feel pressured into making a decision, but take your time and try and do what's best for you and do what's best for the family.
And it's not an overnight decision. It could take you 6 months to figure out what to do.
Mhm.
And I think Catherine and I were talking about this before the podcast that sometimes you know that you're gonna have to change jobs because you wanna be with your kids more or something, but there's so much change going on right now that maybe you wanna say, "I'm just gonna wait a year." You can always try it. If it's not working, then you can look for a new job that has better hours. So
Mhm.
it's definitely not an overnight decision. You shouldn't feel pressured. You can try different things. Like Catherine said, the parenting schedule is always changeable. You can always go back and say, now that I have this new job, I have more time. I'd like the kids more. Or I have them less, I got this job and we have to make adjustments. So that is tricky. And also I would recommend a divorce coach to help you figure out what you're good at, what you like to do, what makes sense to you as far as employment or not employment or part-time employment or a business or anything you want to do, divorce coaches can help you figure that stuff out. They work with you to help you uncover what might work for you.
Mhm.
Okay, getting down to the last point, a decision that people sometimes have to make. When should I start dating?
That's another very, individual decision. But what I can tell you is people don't have to wait until the divorce is final. They don't have, you can date it basically once you're separated or once the divorce process has started, at least in Massachusetts, the judges don't look down on somebody for dating. And it's not going to be, no one's going to pursue it as, as a negative against the spouse who started dating. The one thing I do tell my clients though is do not bring your significant other to court with you because that only inflames the situation and it's just not a good idea. So, and then the
Great
other,
advice.
yeah.
I could see someone doing
Oh,
that.
people do, believe me.
Mhm.
And it never ends well. But the other piece that I get asked quite a bit is when can I introduce my children to a significant other? And that's another sort of tricky um, area. Usually the rule of thumb, at least in Massachusetts, is once you've been in a serious romantic relationship for 6 months, then at that point it's okay to introduce the children. And again, it's not carved in stone, but that's sort of the default that the courts will go to if asked, if a judge has to decide. They really don't want to get into it, but just because you don't want kids to be introduced to a partner and then, the partner's out of the picture a month later. So, once there's sort of an established relationship, then for say 6 months, then it's okay to introduce the partner.
Okay, I also want to tell my listeners it's probably a good idea if you're dating someone to keep everything off social media
Oh,
because that is going
absolutely.
to inflame your ex also. And then you're going to say to me, no, Jackie, I blocked my ex. And then I'm going to say to you, but somebody in your Facebook page is going to take a picture of their screen and text it to your ex-husband. And he's going to be so pissed that he's going to say, you know what? That alimony amount that I offered is now off the table and it's going to really mess with your divorce. I've heard a million stories
Yeah.
and I want to tell a personal story. I've never told this, but I think it's really applicable to this.
Mm.
My ex-husband started dating my neighbor when we were still going through our divorce, and she was this blonde, beautiful, skinny, much younger person than me, and I was really upset about it. And she would stand at the bus stop with us every morning, and you could just tell she was so in love and so happy, and I really was not happy. And then the day my divorce was final, she came up to me at the bus stop. The kids got on the bus and she's like, oh my gosh, it's such a big day for you. Do you want me to babysit the kids? She was so excited and so happy that I went to court. I thought I was going to be all teary eyed and crying. I was so angry the whole time that I couldn't even think about anything else. And I was like to the point and just let's get this over with. And my lawyer said to me, boy, I thought you'd be more upset. And I was like, nope, I'm not. So, just try to keep things quiet. Even though I wasn't upset because I wanted to get back with my husband, it was just very thrown in my face, like
Mm.
she was trying to take over my family.
Yeah.
And they
Well,
ended up
and
breaking up like 3 months later.
right.
So whatever.
Surprise, surprise. But the other time you'll see it is one spouse will cry, poor mouth, I have no money, I can't afford this. But then you go on social media and they're taking a trip or they're, spending money at a concert or they're so it's just social media. I agree with you, just stay off it. It doesn't work in your favor.
And the last thing I wanted to say about dating is that nobody should judge you, and you shouldn't feel judged or guilty if you want to date the day your ex moves out or whatever, because what the people who are judging you don't understand is that you might have felt alone and lonely for the last 5 years. So,
Mm.
your ex husband, now that the divorce is moving forward and he is and sorry, my daughter just walked in. We have to edit that out. Okay. Now that your divorce is finally moving forward, they don't realize because they just heard about it, so they think, "I can't believe she's already dating," but they don't really realize that you've been unhappy for several years and felt alone and lonely and it was over. So, on that note, I want to thank you, Catherine, for being on the show.
Oh,
First of
you're
all, I think
welcome.
you're
Thank you
so
for inviting
smart,
me.
so experienced. All right, sorry, I talked over you. Go, let's
No,
edit
that's
that out. All right. Thank you so on that note, thank you so much, Catherine, for being on the show.
Thank you for inviting me. I truly enjoyed it.
Well, I have so much respect for you. I trust you. I want to tell my listeners, if you live in Massachusetts and you need a divorce attorney, Catherine's my go-to. She is wonderful. And we've known each other now for a couple of years and
Mm.
we've talked a lot. I've interviewed her a lot and really, really have a lot of respect for you and your practice.
Oh, thank you so much.
So if you want to reach Catherine, you can find her on her website at cbgoodlaw.com. You can also find her in the trusted professional section of Divorced Girl Smiling. And if you want to listen to more podcasts, read articles, download my mobile app, or sign up for my free consult, divorcedgirlsmiling.com is the place to go. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. We'll talk to you real soon.